The dinosaurs became extinct in the end Mesozoic extinction 65 million years ago, and the Cenozoic era began. When the Cenozoic era began, the continents were not fused together as they had been in long periods of time during the Paleozoic or in the Mesozoic. Instead, for the most part, they were floating islands. South America was isolated from Africa and North America. Africa was not continually connected to Europe or Asia. India was not yet fused to Asia. Australia was farther from Indonesia. And so therefore, lots of groups of organisms evolved in certain parts of the world and were limited to those parts of the world, at least during the early Cenozoic era, say during the Paleocene. And so there is a group known as Afrotheria, where mammals evolved in Africa and were only known in Africa for a long period of time. Later in the Cenozoic, the continents would contact each other more. So for example, elephant shrews are limited to Africa. The elephants are, going to be a topic of this playlist. They evolved in Africa and for the longest time were only known in Africa. As were other relatives of elephants known as tethys. Now the tethys include the manatees, the dugong, the sirens of today. These are relatives of elephants, and their early fossil record was limited to Africa. And then there were a few other groups found only in Africa as well. And so when the age of mammals in the Cenozoic began, this idea of groups being endemic to certain parts of the world was important. Including the group Afrotheria. Now, a difficulty is there is an extinct group of semi-aquatic mammals known as demostylians. They have, in some classifications, been associated with animals like elephants and with manatees, but then in other classifications, not. And so their phylogenetic position is not quite clear, and they were not native to Africa. So it is possible that they are related to elephants and sirens, but it's possible that there are similarities in their semi-aquatic lifestyle was simply a convergent evolution where mammals in different parts of the world were adapting to similar lifestyles. One of the things which also existed early in the Mesozoic era, one relevant feature might have been that there were a number of sharks in the Mesozoic. Many became extinct in the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. But in the early Cenozoic, one of the noteworthy sharks was Megalodon, a relative of great white sharks, which could nevertheless get to be about 40 feet in length, the size of the whale sharks today. Why? Well, at that same time period, not only did the big aquatic predatory reptiles become extinct, but also mammals were experimenting with semi-aquatic groups. So the first whales, early elephants probably would have been aquatic to some degree, but then also these demostylians and tethys, like the early sirens. So as mammals began to evolve into semi-aquatic lineages, a very large predatory shark evolved at the same time. So that's probably connected. So while there were many groups native to Africa, at least at the beginning, the largest of them, and for now I'd like to ignore some of the primates, which would obviously give rise to the human lineage, another significant African lineage, obviously. I'd like to focus on the elephants. So today, elephants are a minor group. So, there's two African elephant species, an Indian elephant, which is no longer found in the wild. They differ in their ear size, their tusks, and one might think, oh, I know the elephants. But during the Cenozoic, elephants were a huge group found all over the world. Some of the species were 3 feet tall at the shoulder. There were some species significantly larger than modern elephants. Some had tusks in their upper jaws, some had tusks in their lower jaws, some had tusks in their upper and lower jaws. In many, the tusks were simply large teeth, which had not yet, become so elongated to be, the distinctive elephant tusks, etc. So elephants were quite a varied group throughout the tens of millions of years of the Cenozoic era. Um, and so this playlist offers a overview of many of these elephant groups. And in this video, I'd like to just kind of provide a summary of what is found in this playlist. When the Paleocene began, there were no elephants in the modern sense, but there were elephant relative, primitive proboscideans. In fact, elephants are one of the few modern groups which actually date to the Paleocene. So the first 10 million years of the Cenozoic era, from 65 to 56 million years ago, that's recognized as the Paleocene. Most mammals alive today, the earliest members of their orders, are known from the Eocene. So the Paleocene mammals would have been foreign to us, but elephants would have been one exception. So by the end of the Paleocene, there were primitive members of the elephant group. Now they would have only been, say, 3 feet tall or so at the shoulder, many of them. They did not yet have true tusks, but they did have enlarged um, lateral incisors. And so, two things. Tusks are not these unique elephant structures. They're simply large teeth. Ivory is not a unique elephant structure. It's simple enamel and dentin. It's just that when teeth are enormous, as they are with tusks, now the enamel and dentin can be worked and used in other ways. And so ivory, then is simply something which, I mean, you possess ivory in your mouth in that sense, this enamel and dentin. Um, Elephants would soon be known from all continents except for Australia and Antarctica. But at the beginning, they are only known from Africa. So this is one of those Africa-only groups. The first elephants had plenty of teeth. So they had incisors, canines, premolars, molars, but this would begin to change. They would lose many of the types of teeth and then develop the very specialized teeth which modern elephants have. So there were primitive elephants dating from the Paleocene. As then the Cenozoic moved on, there were later groups, including Paleo Mastodon. And you can see the Paleo Mastodon now had short tusks in both the upper and lower jaws, and was beginning to lose some of the other teeth, like the canines and the central incisors. Paleomastodon known only from Africa. Move forward a little further in time. Now, the group of elephants known as the mastodons were known. Now, mastodons are significant for many reasons, one of which is that they are the first group of elephants to leave Africa and then to become dominant throughout the world. Significantly, mastodons would be common in North America, as we'll see in just a second. Mastodons had elongated tusks in their upper and lower jaws, although the species in North America, it would be only the males which would have short tusks, known as the tush, in their lower jaws. For a long time, when elephant skulls were found, first they were thought to be giant humans, so obviously that was a mistake. But then secondly, mammoths and mastodons were thought to be the same prehistoric elephant. But then it was Georges Cuvier, the founder of comparative anatomy in the mid 1800s, and who made great contributions to paleontology. He noticed the teeth of the elephants varied, and he noticed that some of the elephants, they had teeth that looked like this, while other elephants, they had teeth that looked like modern elephants. And so it was Cuvier who realized that we should split mammoths and mastodons into two different groups. And the mastodons are named for their teeth. Cuvier thought that these teeth resembled breasts. And so the word mastodon literally means breast tooth. Now, this is significant, not only because this is a feature that can distinguish between mastodons and mammoths, but also mastodons are earlier. See how large their distribution in the Cenozoic is. Mammoths are only known from the later periods. Mastodons evolved when the world was warmer and wetter. And so these teeth are teeth for eating leaves. These are browsing elephants. Mammoths and modern elephants, their teeth look very different. They have grazing teeth for eating grass. They evolved when the world was cooler and drier. And so mastodons not only have differences in their teeth, and this can be used to distinguish them from mammoths, but then also their teeth are reflective of the time in which they evolved. As ice ages approached, planet Earth became cooler and drier. So here, once again, you can see the browsing teeth of mastodons, and that is different from both the modern elephant. These surfaces are for grazing on grass, and mammoths would have teeth like modern elephants, and not like um, mastodons. Mastodons have relatively straight tusks in their upper jaws. This is the mastodon sugar displayed at Orange County Community College, where I teach. Males could have small tusks in their lower jaws. So there's that male, that short tusk once again. Here you can see that the large opening at the top of the skull where the two nostrils fuse together at the base of the trunk. Early people who studied elephant skulls didn't realize that the eye was here and the jaw muscles were here. So once again, the first mammals lost that post-orbital bar. And so reptiles have a separate opening for the eyes and the jaw muscles. Mammals, when they lost the post-orbital bar, this was now fused. And so many people, when they found these elephant heads, didn't realize that the eye went here, the jaw muscles went here. They thought that the eye went here, and thus they thought that there was a large central eye in the middle of the forehead, and they thought that this was a cyclops. It's not a human cyclops. This is an elephant head, and that's not the hole for the eye. That's the fused hole for the nostrils above where, at the base of a trunk. So mastodons, they spread all throughout the world and live for the majority of the Cenozoic era, so for tens of millions of years. The last one's becoming extinct in North America about 10,000 years ago. Now, not only were the ice ages, the last ice age ending at that point, but that's also when humans were spreading throughout the world and had reached North America. So it was probably climate change and predation by humans which caused the extinction of the mastodons. Dinotheres were a later group of elephants which got to be huge. They are known from the old world, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and they had prominent tusks in their lower jaws, perhaps to scrape bark off of trees. So they modified their skulls. They lost many of the types of teeth in the upper jaws, having now prominent tusks in their lower jaws. Early hominids, the ancestors of humans, had to deal with giant dinotheres throughout the habitats in Africa where they evolved. Not only did mastodons leave Africa and spread throughout the world, but so too did other groups of um, elephants. So gomphotheres evolved in Africa with prominent tusks in their upper and lower jaws, but then they would spread throughout Asia, Europe, North America, and then 4 million years ago, when the Americas joined, they would even reach then South America. So gomphotheres, while extinct today, were very successful throughout the world and included a number of forms which reached South America, as you see here on the right. Many gomphotheres evolved very elongated lower jaws that were even shovel-like. And so when one examines the elephants of, say, Asia, there are some with these elongated shovel-like lower jaws, perhaps to scoop up soft aquatic vegetation. So they were quite successful. So here you see, one of those Asian forms with this shovel-like lower jaw. So they are extinct today, but they were a successful group of elephants. Mammoths were very successful. Now, mammoths are perhaps best known by the woolly mammoth, which adapted to the Ice Age frigid environments of Eurasia. But mammoths were a broader category than that. The largest mammoths were not the woolly mammoth. Mammoths were distinct that they stood very tall at the shoulders, so they were much taller than, say, mastodons. They had giant curved tusks as opposed to the much straighter tusks of mastodons and other elephants. There was a fossilized pair of male mammoths whose tusks had become interlocked. And so apparently males would use these to fight with each other. Once again, some of these males must have been fighting when their tusks became interlocked. And there were multiple species of mammoth. The woolly mammoth was not the tallest of them. I believe that the Colombian mammoth was the tallest of the mammoths. And so there was a diversity of elephants throughout the Cenozoic era. The mammoths were the closest relatives of the modern elephants. Now, among the elephants towards the end, there was this one group called the Stegodonts, yet another group of elephants. But these spread throughout Asia and then reached a number of islands where they became much smaller. So there were dwarf elephants in addition to large elephants. Some stood only 3 feet tall at the shoulder. And significant then in Indonesia, not only were there dwarf elephants, but this is where one of the species of human evolved, Homo Floresiensis, which stood only 3 feet tall at the shoulder. And so dwarf elephants lived on the same island, the island of Flores, as a dwarf human species. And so, Homo Floresiensis might have interacted with and preyed on dwarf elephants, just as humans elsewhere were preying on mastodons, etc. And so elephants were, forgive me, let me just go back to this video. Elephants today, perhaps aren't significant in the global sense. Only a few species are known that are in danger of extinction, or even the Indian elephants extinct in the wild. However, if one were to consider the last 60 million years, elephants were a much more significant group that varied in size, that varied in the types of teeth that they had, whether, which adapted them for either eating leaves or grass towards the end, which varied in the tusks that they had, with tusks in their upper jaws, lower jaws, and some in both. And so elephants, which originated in Africa, spread throughout the world and were a much more significant group than they are today.